The Motherlode is a returning dungeon for Season 2 of The War Within. The dungeon starts with a 39-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that time frame, you will upgrade your key. As you make your way to the first boss, you'll encounter multiple different mobs. Off-duty labourers will cast Throw Wrench at the tank, dealing a moderate amount of physical damage. Tanks you'll want to be careful as you're gathering here, as they can easily sync up and one-shot you, so don't turn your back and use a defensive. Refreshment vendors will channel an Ice Spritzer on a random player. This needs to be interrupted immediately as it deals heavy ticking damage while stunning the player for 6 seconds. Mech jockeys need to be focused down as they will run off to a nearby inactive mechanized peacekeeper and attempt to cast Activate Mech. Make sure to stop this cast with hard CC like stuns or disorients, or you'll have to deal with a deadly mechanized peacekeeper. These mobs will cast tear gas, spawning multiple large swirlies that your whole party will need to move out from, but more notably they will also cast Charged Shield, blasting the tank with high nature damage and then cleaving this huge nature damage onto the rest of your group. This buff lasts 12 seconds, so tanks need to mitigate this incoming damage to avoid being one-shot, and the rest of your group should be prepared with defensives while the shield is charged. Hired assassins need to be interrupted on their Toxic Blades cast. This buffs the assassin for 6 seconds, making their abilities deal extra nature damage. The assassins then need to be stopped on their Fan of Knives channel. This channel will nuke your group with AoE damage, so make sure that it doesn't go off. This will deal even more damage if the assassin is buffed with Toxic Blades. Addled thugs will cast Uppercut on random players, dealing large physical damage to anybody in the circle and knocking players struck up in the air. Use a defensive and spread if targeted, and make sure not to get knocked back into other mobs. They'll also cast Inhale Vapors. This buffs their movement and attack speed by 50% for 15 seconds, so your tank will need to be prepared with defensives. Now we can take on the first boss, the coin-operated Crowd Pummeler. Occasionally, the boss will cast Static Pulse, dealing large AoE damage to the group, knocking all players back and applying a nasty dot to everybody struck. Your group will want to commit a defensive for this cast. During the fight, the boss will constantly throw coins on the floor and then attempt to suck them up with his coin magnet cast upon reaching 100 energy. Each coin that the boss sucks up will increase his damage by 15% with a pay to win buff, so tanks must make sure to slowly kite the boss around the arena to avoid him gaining the buff. Periodically, the boss will channel Foot Bomb Launcher, dotting multiple foot bombs around the arena. After 15 seconds, these bombs will blow up, dealing fatal party-wide damage and increasing everyone's damage taken by 25% for 15 seconds. So as soon as they come out, all players will need to run over to the bombs and position themselves so that when you click the bomb, it fires towards the boss, marked by a blue arrow indicator. This instead increases the boss's damage taken by 25% with each bomb, so make sure to pop your offensive cooldowns when the boss is taking maximum damage. The Crowd Pummeler will also face a random player's direction with Shocking Claw, a wide frontal that all players must dodge, so position yourselves relatively near the boss to make dodging easier. After taking out the first boss, we can make our way to the next boss, Azerokk, but not before taking on some new mobs. Azerite Extractors will cast Puncture on the tank, dealing large upfront damage and applying a 6-second bleed. Tanks will want to commit a defensive to this cast. More notably, they will also channel Rapid Extraction, painting the floor in swirlies that need to be dodged while also pulsing out heavy AoE damage. Everyone needs to use a defensive when this cast goes off. Once the extractor dies, it will spawn a driller that your tank will just have to pick up aggro on. Venturecoat Earthshapers will cast Rock Lance at random targets. This must be kicked or it will deal large damage and apply a nasty 6-second dot. If successful, make sure to commit a defensive. Mine Rats will throw rocks at random players, just use a defensive if you get low here. Wanton Sappers will cast a final blast once they get low health, marking large swirlies on the ground around them that all players must immediately move out from. Note their cast can be stopped with hard CC if you're stuck in a bad position. Next up, Stone Furies will cast Furious Quake, dealing massive party-wide damage to the group and reducing your movement speed by 60%, so make sure to interrupt this cast. But you will also need to interrupt their Tectonic Barrier cast. A successful cast will shield the Stone Fury heavily, which also prevents the mob from being interrupted while it holds. Taskmaster Ascari is a priority kill target. He will let out an overtime roar that increases all mobs' haste by 30% for 20 seconds, and this can stack. This buff can, however, be purged or dispelled. He will also brutal charge a random player, dealing moderate damage and slowing them, and then he will immediately cast a massive slam around him, dealing fatal damage to anybody within 12 yards, so make sure to run out. Tanks will need to be very wary of his auto attacks as they apply a stacking bleed that must be mitigated, and to prevent the bleed from stacking too high, you can actually kite away from Ascari when he casts his massive slam before re-engaging at 0 stacks. Next up, we'll take on Azerokk. This fight will start with 2 Earth Rager adds that fixate on random players until they are killed, your DPS's priority is to nuke these adds down while CCing them. The boss will however cast an Azerite Infusion on the healthier of the two adds, which will heal up the Earth Rager, free it from any crowd control and increase its damage done by 50%, but also increases its damage taken by 150%. DPS should immediately swap and nuke the infused Earth Rager because while this add is buffed up, it'll also pulse heavy party-wide damage every 2 seconds, so healers need to stay on top of this outgoing damage, and if you're fixated by the empowered add, you must stay clear. It applies a nasty stacking bleed that will likely kill you. During the fight, Azerokk will face a random player's direction and cast a Tectonic Smash frontal, dealing fatal damage to anyone caught within it, so make sure to sidestep this. Finally, Azerokk will periodically cast Resonant Quake, dealing large party-wide damage that also reduces movement speed by 30% for 6 seconds, so commit a defensive here and avoid the pool that the boss drops under him. This pool slows anything within it, so players can also use these puddles to slow the adds down. After taking out Azerokk, jump in the minecart to head down to the third area. Venture Co. Alchemist will cast Transmute Enemy to Goo on a random player. Make sure to interrupt this or a player will be turned into a pile of goo for 10 seconds. This can however be dispelled by the healer if it does go through. They will also cast Caustic Compound, which needs to be interrupted. This cast inflicts heavy nature damage and leaves a 6-second dot, so use a defensive if the cast is successful on you. Venture Co. Masterminds will Mind Lash random players, dealing decent arcane damage over time, so use a defensive if you get low, and they will also cast Brainstorm, dealing light party-wide damage and marking swirlies on the ground that players will need to dodge. These swirlies turn into Psychic Tempests that patrol the area that will deal heavy damage and silence any players struck. Make sure to avoid these typhoons. Weapons Testers will target a random player with Echo Blade, dealing large sonic damage to the player and also echoing that damage to up to 3 nearby players. If targeted, you'll want to spread away from your party. Test subjects will die off quickly, but just note that they do gain a stacking damage increase every 2 seconds that they are alive. Rixxa Fluxflame is the next boss we'll be taking on. Periodically throughout the fight, Rixxa will paint the floor in Azerite. Make sure to dodge these swirlies as a team so that you're all on the same side. She will then target a random player with Azerite Catalyst, firing even more Azerite swirlies at the player's location, so this player will need to dodge these swirlies while trying not to fill the room with them as you are limited for space on this fight. If you can, try to place them along the lines of Azerite that are already placed. This is because Rixxa will then target random players with a Propellant Blast, dealing heavy ticking damage in a frontal cone while also pushing the player back, but this blast also pushes the Azerite back, so these players will want to try and aim this blast at as much Azerite as they can. After defeating Rixxa, there are 3 new mobs we'll encounter before the last boss. Venture Co. War Machines are priority mobs that deploy crawler mines periodically. These mines are also dotted around the last area and will fixate a random player with Seek and Destroy, blowing themselves up for fatal damage upon reaching their target. All players should immediately swap and kill these mines while CCing them to prevent deaths here. The War Machine will also channel a charged shot, pulsing enormous party-wide damage, so all players should use a defensive for this cast, especially if you pull 2 at a time. Ordnance Specialists will immediately cast an Artillery Barrage, spawning multiple swirlies that all players must dodge. Finally, we can take on the last boss, Mogul Razdunk. At the start of the fight, the boss will summon 2 Boomba drones that will patrol the edges of the room. Occasionally, these drones will paint the room in micro-missile swirlies that must be dodged by all players, but you will need to keep an eye on the drone's positioning as these swirlies explode very quickly. The swirlies will only spawn directly in front of the Boombas, so look for the safe space around the room and pre-position. During this time, Razdunk will target a player with a homing missile, marking a massive circle that the rest of your group must move out from as you kite it away. Upon impact with you, it will explode for high fire damage and leave a nasty 6-second dot to anybody within the circle, so use a defensive if targeted or in the circle here. Mogul will then also face a random direction and begin channeling a Gatling gun frontal. All players must dodge this frontal at the same time as dodging the micro missiles from the Boombas, but be wary as this Gatling gun has a very fast rotation. Upon reaching 50%, the boss will become immune and spawn in 2 Venture Co. Sky Scorchers. All players will want to immediately swap and kill these adds off as they spam cast a Buster Shot on random players, dealing a substantial amount of fire damage. While killing off these adds, the boss will occasionally target a random player with Drill Smash. This player will need to position themselves on top of one of the big 3 red rockets dotted around the room to remove a stack of the boss's configuration drill buff. And once all 3 stacks have been removed, the boss will return to phase 1. You'll want to use a defensive when the Drill Smash goes off as it does hefty party-wide damage. But that's it for this boss, and that wraps up the Motherlode for Mythic Plus in Season 2. If you're interested in my nameplates, they are from my free plates profile which can be found inside my Discord. The link will be in the description. And if this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below, subscribe to your boy for more dungeon guides, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.